So, hospitals routinely allow male patients to share female wards if they self-identify as women. Official guidance tells them that they're supposed to be eliminating mixed-sex wards, but they're not. For my money, that's the real scandal here, is that you are not actually eliminating mixed-sex wards properly. Last time my mum was in hospital, there was a fellow in the same ward. But it is, I suppose, an inevitable consequence of that the self-identifying as a woman constituency are also in female wards. And this causes upset, which I understand better than I did last time we had this conversation, because there is a fear. You see, I'm probably going to get this wrong now, but the phone lines are open, and if I get it wrong, please tell me. I'll try to be polite if you do. There's a fear of sexual violence. So the reason why... I'm going to break this down as I see it, okay? There's a whole chapter about this in my book, so I'm not coming to it completely cold. The argument is this. There are two arguments, actually, but I fully understand one of them, so I'll begin with that. Because a man who self-identifies as a woman, a human being who self-identifies as a woman, may be claiming to do so in bad faith in order to access female-only spaces with evil intent. And because of the putative existence of that human being, all of the human beings identifying as women in good faith should be denied access to the female-only space. Have I got that right? We think? Okay. There's a logic to that. But it's a slightly warped logic in my humble, because you are punishing the people who behave in good faith for the possible, potential or real actions of people who behave in bad faith. And that seems to me to be the opposite of how our legal and moral frameworks work. You don't get punished, unless you're a Muslim, I suppose, in the current climate. You don't get punished as an innocent person for the presumed potential or actual offences of a guilty person. But I'm a man. And that puts things on a slightly different footing, you know? The second point of the argument is harder for me to grasp properly, and that is about the travails of femininity, if you will. And oddly, I've had this conversation with a 12-year-old girl who pointed out to me that men who self-identify as women, human beings who self-identify as women, will never have periods. And having periods is not much fun. There are other things that come with being a woman. The threat of sexual violence in a way that no man can ever understand. For every idiot who says, I once got my arse pinched in a gay club, there are millions of men who are slowly coming to the realisation that walking home from the station at night in the dark is a very, very different experience for a man who might worry about his mobile phone being nicked than it is for a woman who will worry about being raped. It's a constant in the lives of many, many women. If you're a woman of robust constitution and you never ever have those fears, great, but you can't deny the existence of the ones that do. So there's a philosophical objection to transgender people on the grounds that you will never know how tough it is to be a woman. Isn't there a country and western song that addresses that issue rather aptly? And I get that as well. But for the record, and this is why I'm afraid I'm going to be a rubbish phone-in host, because I really can see both sides on this. For the record, I know some trans people, and they're not kidding. You know, when we talk about homophobia, and this isn't in the book, actually, I forgot to put it in, and so a homophobe might be on the line if you go back a few years, and, they do the line about lifestyle choice, and I say to them, well, when did you choose to be straight? And their little heads explode. But there's another question you can ask when they're talking about choices and when they're talking about lifestyles. And I think it applies to trans as well. I think it does, partly. It's a brilliant question. If ever anybody, either for forgivable reasons or unforgivable reasons, is expressing suspicion of or disapproval of homosexuality, and they are sort of insisting that it's not real and that people are doing it for attention or they're doing it as a, quotes, lifestyle choice, then I will tell you after the break what you can say to them to completely undermine their position. And you won't even have to... Well, actually, it's not even in my book.
You're listening to a podcast of James O'Brien from LBC.
Why would anybody choose to be like this as long as people like you exist? Say that to a virulent homophobe. Why would it? I mean, if people have died because of their sexuality at the hands of governments and at the hands of terrorists and criminals and murderers and bombers. Why would anybody choose to be that as long as people like you exist? It's a very powerful line. And the idea that people choose or I would just say good faith and bad faith. I think we've broken this argument down really well. So it's not about the wards, the people who self-identify as women getting access to women's wards, because there are plenty of men who don't self-identify as women who get access to wards that women are in as well, and that's something that should be a priority for the NHS. But do we really punish all of the people who have been born in the wrong body? Do we really punish them because we're frightened of people pretending to have been born in the wrong body in order to get access to female-only spaces? That's my question. That's all. And as I say, I don't for a minute dispute the validity and the reality of transgender. I know people. It's usually the best way to decide whether or not something is real or not, is to meet it head on. Martin's in St Albans. Martin, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello.
Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
It's a subject which is a bit, I get a little bit emotional about because it's to do with my daughter who's trans.
Okay.
So forgive me if I stumble a bit.
Of course.
Basically, the year before last, my now daughter, who was then my son, was suffering a lot of depression.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get to the bottom of it, didn't know what it was all about. But the Christmas before last, she finally told us that she was transgender. And the reason she felt she wasn't able to tell us was because she had been building up to commit suicide.
Oh, mate.
So we've been through quite a lot over the last sort of 18 months.
Yeah. How old is she now? Sorry.
She's just turned 18.
Just turned 18. So this was, yeah, okay. Got you.
Yeah, basically, transgender is an issue that I haven't really put a lot of thought into. I've never really had any reason to.
No.
I work in quite a male-dominated environment, and I suppose I'm quite a blokish kind of person, so...
Yeah, I do know.
But
this was a bolt from the blue in every sense.
It was.
But you love your baby.
Yeah, of course I do. And I said to her then at the time, look, I've never had any expectations of you. I love you, whatever. And
straight away, if you don't mind me asking, because historically it would be sexuality rather than transgender issues that saw parents chuck their children out onto the street in disgust and disapproval, and I'm sure some trans children have gone through that. So you must have struggled a bit in the first instance. I
did. This is what I said to her.
Yeah.
I mean, how I dealt with it myself and struggled with it myself was another thing. I mean, I was heartbroken because, for one thing, I felt that I was mourning the loss of my son.
Yes.
And another thing is that no parent wants to see their child go through so much trauma and stress.
And no one would go through that trauma and stress for whimsical, trivial reasons. That's another point that I think gets lost sometimes in the noise and the chatter.
I think it does, and that's one of the reasons why I rang you, because I work with a sort of lot of rough old lorry drivers and stuff like that, and a lot of them are rough diamonds. And when I've spoken to them about it and told them my story, they said, "God, I've never really thought of it like that." When I've said to them that I've sat up at night with my eldest child in tears, crying, saying that all they want to be is normal, that they never chose this, they never wanted it. This is something that's chosen them. It kind of puts a different perspective on things.
It does. And I do, my great belief in life is that most people, given the chance and a calm explanation, will be steered away from the sort of anger and ignorance that often motivates them. But we move now to this tricky question, and I don't need to know where on the path your daughter is, but I presume that she would rather use female facilities in public spaces than male facilities, obviously. And a lot of females say that she shouldn't be entitled to do that, whether we're talking about toilets or hospital wards or swimming changing rooms. And I wonder how you feel and think about that.
Well, I'm not sure what the answers are.
No.
Basically, my daughter has the hormones now of a young woman.
Okay.
Hasn't gone through the full surgery as yet, because obviously they have to live as women for a certain amount of time, and also have a lot of counselling to make sure that they're on the right path. But what I found really heartbreaking was this summer, I had some days out with my children.
Yeah.
We had some nice days out, and like you do when you're in town and that, you sort of get to a point where you want to find a toilet and stuff like that. And I suddenly realised that she wasn't going. And I said to her, I won't say her name because,
of course.
She, I said, and then I felt so guilty because it hadn't even crossed my mind that it might be a difficulty for her.
Yeah.
And I said to her, what about a toilet? And I said, if you're worried about it, I'm sure we can find a disabled toilet somewhere and something like that we can use. And she said, I'll just wait till I get home. It's all right, I'll just wait till I get home. So I felt absolutely dreadful. I think that most women and most of my female friends haven't really got a problem with somebody like her. I mean, she looks like a woman going into a female toilet and using a cubicle. I think
the argument that is made, and it's a strong one, and as you say, you don't know what the right answer is, and nor do I. I'm slightly unnerved by the people who are 100% certain that they're right, when everything to me, and indeed to you, although your experience is a lot more profound than mine, seems so nuanced and still so complicated. But it's the notion of threat. So they might well say, I've got no problem with your daughter, but we can't have someone on every bathroom door checking whether someone who was born male but now identifies as a female, regardless of where they are hormonally or medically. If we can't have someone checking everyone, and although your daughter might get a pass from the trans police on the door of every bathroom, in the absence of a trans police person on the door of every bathroom, we have to say no to every trans person in order to protect the security and the safety of females in previously female-only spaces. And that's quite hard to argue against as well.
Yeah, I do. I understand that. Like I say, I don't really know what the answers are, but let's face it, most anybody could walk into a female public toilet.
That's. I mean, you giggle because you think you're sounding glib, but you're not sounding glib. This is the point. I worked up something before the programme about a blind ward in a hospital, and it was a really brilliant point. I promise, Martin, but I've forgotten what it was. But it was to do with the perceived danger versus real danger, and the threat. But we're blokes. And, we don't know what it feels like to be a woman. We don't know what the threat is, the constant sense of, and we know that men are goats, we know that men can be, so can women, but particularly in the context of physical force, men can be very, very frightening to almost all women. And the idea that in your changing room, when you're swapping your bra because you're trying on a party dress or something like that, and the idea that someone is pretending to be a woman so that they can have a butcher's at you in the altogether, it frightens and unnerves and disturbs women. And I understand why. I guess there's no answer to this that's going to keep all the people all happy all the time. But for me, and the reason why I got into so much trouble last time, I currently feel more sympathy for your daughter than I do for that theoretical woman trying on bras in the changing room of Debenhams.
Well, yeah, thanks for that. Changing rooms is another matter. I think that if you're going to go down the gym or something in the state of transition that my daughter was in, then I think it would be sensible to go and get changed in a disabled loo or shower in a disabled shower. I can't see how anyone would have a problem with that.
No. Well, where would she rather be?
I don't really know at this point. I guess she would rather be where she feels she belongs, in a female toilet and changing room, but she obviously feels very I'm guessing that she would feel very self-conscious. As far as toilets are concerned, obviously changing rooms are a different issue, but I think most of my female friends wouldn't worry at all about her going in there.
With cubicles and doors, that's the point, isn't it? It's the communal nature of a changing room. Topshop sometimes it's more like a common room than a cubicle situation. And if you have the equipment of a man, it's going to be very, very odd for you to be getting undressed in a female-only space. I don't know how many people with the equipment of a man who identifies as women would want to get undressed in a female-only space. It's another question that I never hear being asked because everyone's too busy throwing stuff at each other.
Well, of course not. My daughter hates her body. She wants it changed. You know, she doesn't she doesn't want people to see her any more than other people want to be seen, I guess. But
Gosh,
I think, going as far as toilets are concerned,
Yeah.
I think that a lot of men I know would be far more uncomfortable with someone being dressed as a female coming in and using the toilet in there than women I know that would, you know, would feel uncomfortable with her going into the ladies' loo. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
it's a difficult issue.
I know, and I think I guess people like you are the future and the answer to this, and because you help people like me see all sides of the argument. But until some people on both sides of the argument acknowledge that the other lot have at least some valid points, then we're probably going to carry on in the circular firing squad that we're in at the moment. I hope you'll allow me to say something to you directly, Martin.
Yes, of course, yeah.
I'm glad that you've mentioned blokishness and working in the haulage industry and knocking about with fellas who would, in a cliched, stereotypical worldview, be presumed to be prejudiced about these matters, and you've shone a light into their lives and they've shed some of their prejudices. But beyond all of that, you are a brilliant dad, mate.
Oh, thank you.
You really are.
Well, for me, it was just, there could be no other way. You've just got to be there for them, and you've got to, you know, like I say, I had no expectations of my children. All I want is for them to be happy.
That's all we all want, but we're not necessarily quite as good at it or as selfless as you have been in helping them pursue that happiness. You take care, mate. It's coming up to...
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Martin. It's coming up to 11:30, and there you have it, you see. I feel sorrier at this point in the conversation for Martin's daughter than I do for a woman who thinks Martin's daughter should stay out of the toilet or get changed in the disabled cubicle. Then, or not in the... Yeah, it should be happy... Not happy. I feel sorrier for Martin's daughter than I do for somebody who is frightened of a theoretical threat. Now, when that threat ceases to be theoretical, and there are one or two examples of men pretending to self-identify as women to get access to female-only spaces, then the pendulum swings. The mind begins to change a bit. But I'll always come back to feeling so sorry for Martin's daughter, you see, and for trans people that I know who carry burdens that I find unimaginable. More unimaginable than being a woman coming home from the railway station in the dark. But I'll say again, because I'm being the king of caveats this hour, I'm a man, and that does slightly, or completely, depending on your perspective, dilute the validity of my argument. Perhaps if I had a trans daughter like Martin does, then my maleness would be less damaging to my position. But I don't. What do you think about this one, honestly?
You're listening to a podcast of James O'Brien from LBC.